Welcome to the eShopper Reviews Podcast, episode 24. This is the podcast for March 2023. I'm Jenn and I.
And I'm Jake McNeil.
For those new to this podcast, eShopper Reviews is a subreddit on reddit.com where Jake reviews games on the Nintendo Switch platform, and you can find the subreddit at the URL reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. We currently have over 2,100 reviews and counting, and we are supported by your donations on our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. This month's sponsors are Ben, Andy Miller, Xleen, Homer Simpin, Johannes, Talisa, Eli Goodman, Gabriel Coronado Medina, Ilya Zarev, Christopher Wolf, and Seth Christianfeld. Thank you all for helping to keep the reviews coming. Now on to the patron-voted games, which include the standard vote and the all-patron budget vote.
So for the standard vote, as of this recording, there actually have not been any votes on it yet. And there are multiple patrons who very well could vote on this and still might by the end of the month. But as of this recording, we have no idea what the patron voted game for the month of March will be. So I guess we'll look forward to finding that out.
All right. Well, then we'll talk about next month's vote.
Well, no. We still have to talk about the all-patron budget vote.
Oh, we do? Why is that?
Because there are votes on that one.
Oh!
Interestingly, they skipped over the main course and went right for the little appetizer at the end. Although appetizers usually come before that. My metaphor fell apart. Anyway.
Okay, well, we have a tie then, if that's the case. Currently.
As of this recording, we currently have a tie between Snowboarding, the next phase, and the original mobile games. The original mobile games, from what I could tell looking at the entry on the eShop, has like some really retro like games that you'd play with a pen and paper, or like tic-tac-toe and things like that. I'm just going off of memory here, but it's like very, very simple games, which normally you wouldn't necessarily want to actually buy on the eShop, but you're talking about a game that's under $2. So we'll see how good it is. And Snowboarding the next phase, I have not had the best luck with snowboarding games on Nintendo Switch. To my memory, there's only one that I can recall even being good, and that is Grand Mountain Adventure Wonderlands, which was very good, but not quite what I was really craving from a snowboarding game, which is I want that 1080 or SSX style game. Will I get it from a $2 game? Probably not, but here's hoping it's good at least. That's really all I want, is I just want a good game. It doesn't need to be the best game. It doesn't need to be something that's exactly in a certain style. Just as long as it's a good game, I'll be happy. So, because that was a tie between, the Snowboarding the next phase and the original mobile games, I act as a tiebreaker, so I will choose at least one of those two to review in the month of March. So, now we can move on to next month's vote. Have some interesting titles. Yes.
They include Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, Atelier Ryza 3 Alchemist of the End and the Secret Key, Bayonetta Origins Syriza and the Lost Demon, Grim Grimoire Once More, Mega Man Battle Network Legacy Collection, and Minecraft Legends.
You pronounced it Syriza.
Is it
you just saw the trailer. You know it's pronounced Syriza.
Whatever.
Okay, so the games that are listed in this upcoming month's vote are all games that are, I think, fairly major releases due out within either the month of March or April 2023. Any of these seem of particular interest to you?
I mean, the Bayonetta one.
Okay, but we'll probably talk a bit more about that later.
Okay. And then for the all-patron budget game vote, we have Brawl.io, Chain Car Stunt Simulator 3D Extreme Highway Car Driving Games. That's a long name.
It is.
Chris Stored.
Chris Storald?
Chris Stored.
There's an L there.
Chris Tord.
There's an L there.
I'm pronouncing the L.
No, you're not.
Yes,
You're saying Chris Stored.
How do you pronounce it?
Chris Storald. Like Crystal World. Chris Storald.
Chris Tord.
We're keeping that in.
Okay.
Moving on.
Falling elevator, hyper casual demolished, escape survival game. Radiant Flux Hyperfractal 4.0.
Okay.
WBSC eBaseball Power Pros.
Yes.
Okay.
You made it.
I made
Congratulations. So, all of these games are budget games, $2 and under, that have been released in early 2023.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about the highlights that eShopper Reviews has covered in the month of February. Just to note here, these are not necessarily games released in the last month, but games Jake has reviewed that month. And we'll start by talking about...
We'll start by talking about one game that will not be on this list because as of this recording, it has not been released yet. And while I could jump to conclusions and say, oh, it's probably going to be one of my best games or something like that, I don't want to do that because I haven't played it yet. So that is Kirby Return to Dreamland Deluxe. And this was one of the patron-voted games for this month. I have not forgotten it. I am just going to have to wait to talk about it until next month's podcast because it comes out toward the end of this month.
All right, so we'll start with the noteworthy review, which is just the one.
Okay.
It is Discmaster.
This was the other patron-voted game for the month of February. This is the one that won the budget vote, so it is $2 and under, and I think it's just $2. I would need to go and check, but Discmaster is an interesting idea, and that is to take one of the oldest games known to man, tic-tac-toe, which... researching this, I found out it has its roots back in ancient Egypt.
Oh.
Yeah, so tic-tac-toe is a very old game, except anyone who's ever played tic-tac-toe knows why it's a bad game at its core. Because, number one, the obvious best place on the entire 3x3 grid is the center square.
Yep.
And number two, any two players of even remotely adequate skill, they're just going to end up in a tie every single game. This game actually finds an interesting solution to that, which is you're not placing X's and O's, you're placing different pieces down, different discs, and each one has these abilities on it. It can attack up and right, or it can defend down, or whatever. And based on where you place these discs, it can attack pieces and remove them from the board, or it can place an extra defensive perimeter around one spot or something like that. And the fact that they do this kind of, in theory at least, solves both of the problems that I just mentioned, because there's an element of unpredictability that means that you won't always have a tie. In fact, that's very rare in this game. But on top of that, while the center square is still the best one for making matches, it is not a place that you will want to put down your piece early because squares all around it can attack that one. Some really great ideas going on here. Unfortunately, it kind of faceplants when trying to stick the landing there because you only get two pieces at any given time to choose between placing. Some of the pieces are a completely useless, like they don't do anything except for just sit there and wait to be killed. And you don't have any control over how to build your deck of pieces. And I feel like this would have worked so much better if it was set up like a collectible card game. Or if, at the very least, if the pieces that you had all had some use to them other than filling space. Or if you had a bigger hand size, so those useless pieces you could hold off putting down until you're forced to place them because your hand is filling up with useless pieces. Which adds a strategy to, okay, do I put down a useless piece now, or do I save it until later when I might be forced to put it down at a bad time? There are so many ways this game could have been done better to make full use of its really great idea that unfortunately it just doesn't do. So, while I don't think this is a terrible game, I feel like there's so much missed opportunity here. It's not even close to my best games or anything like that. Not one of my worst games. It's just kind of, well, it's worth noting because it was one of the patron voted games rather for this month.
All right, moving on to hidden gems.
Okay.
We're going to start with the bottom.
Oh.
We're going to
moving
start
our way up, huh?
Oh yeah. We're going to start with Caladrius Blaze.
Caladrius Blaze, or Caladrius Blaze, as Jen calls it. This is a really good bullet hell shmup. There's plenty of options with tons of different types of ships, really good gameplay. Overall, it's just a really good shmup. However, I do have to kind of put an asterisk in here. There's a bit of fine print that goes with that, because one of the elements of this game is one of those, like, you don't want to be playing this game when anybody else is watching you, which is, it has something called a shame break system. Whenever your ship gets damaged, your female pilot loses some of her clothing, which is completely unnecessary. It's distracting, and it draws attention to the game's really, really stupid story, too. And it's like, I don't mind cheesecake stuff in games. I don't mind, a little TNA, as they call it. But it doesn't add to this game. It actually detracts from it. And that's not a great thing. But if you can put up with that, if you can tolerate some really, really egregious, shameless stuff like that, it is a really good bullet hell shmup, and I do recommend it.
Okay, next up is... Oh no.
I swear I did not plan this, but it is wonderful seeing you react.
Under Night in Birth EX... What is this?
That is how the game is spelled. I did not make this up.
Under Night in Birth EXE late... Plural?
I think you just have to spell out that part. Under Night in Birth EXE late CL-R. Clur. There you go.
Go ahead.
When you're looking at the Japanese produced anime style fighting games, they have the most ridiculous titles. So I can't very well blame you on this. Like, what the heck even is a Guilty Gear? What is a Melty Blood? Speaking of which, this game, Under Night in Birth EXE late CL-R, is a game by the creators of the Melty Blood franchise. And it's just an all-around great fighting game. A very good 2D style fighting game. Really good animations. Unfortunately, the online lobbies are completely abandoned at this point. But if you're looking for another good 2D fighting game to add to your collection, and there are a bunch of those on Switch at this point, but this is another good one.
Next one is... God, now I'm nervous to say anything else.
Please, Jen, tell us the name of this next game.
Wizorb.
Yeah, good job.
I'm gonna punch you.
Wizorb is a arcade-style brick breaker. Think of games like Breakout, Arkanoid, Alleyway, and this one has a medieval fantasy theme. As an arcade-style brick breaker, it's just a really good brick breaker. A lot of these games are just a really good fit in the name of the genre here. I'm kind of disappointed that's all that it is, because with the fantasy genre, I kind of expect there to be an RPG component to the game. There's even a town you go to and you can give money to the people in the town. And I feel like that would be a great opportunity to give the player some kind of permanent upgrade to their paddle. Give you extra balls, give you a bigger paddle, give you a special ability. And this game doesn't do that. However, while I can be disappointed that this game doesn't take advantage of the opportunity that's there, it's still a great brick breaker. And for $5, yeah, this is well worth adding to your collection. All right. I need to watch myself because I know that I repeat that a lot. So it's a good game.
Last one in the category is Adventures of Pip.
Adventures of Pip is a platformer with some kind of puzzle platformer-y elements to it. It's got this really inventive mechanic where your character starts with this really low pixel kind of rendering where it looks like just a couple of pixels, but you can power up into an even more detailed version of the character, and then again, and each different version of the character has different abilities. So While powering up does help you to do some things, sometimes you might need to power down to do other things that the earlier characters can do. Which is, I think, a really creative mechanic. It's done very well here. There's some excellent level design here. Yeah, just a great platformer with kind of a slight puzzle element to it.
All right. So we only have one in the category of worst games.
Yes.
Which is Grood.
Yes, Grood. Grood is a shmup that prides itself on being super hard. When you go to select your difficulty in the beginning of the game, your options are hard, hard, and hard. And you know, fine. I'm not the biggest fan of super hard games, but I'm not going to knock a game because it is a hard game. I know that there's some people who gravitate toward that. No, this game's problem isn't that it's hard, it's that it's bad. I should elaborate. So, the problem here is there's multiple problems, actually. Number one, it's not just hard. Enemies are bullet sponges and take a ton of damage before they're destroyed. And what's more, they move super fast, making it harder to kill them before they shoot over to your side of the screen anyway. Making things worse is the game uses, it's got some kind of slight 3D stuff going on here. And because of that, it makes it difficult to judge the camera perspective, and your shots don't seem to fire straight. So you have enemies that move too fast, take too much damage, and you can't even hit them because the way the camera is makes it hard to get a beat on them. I've played tons of really great hard shmups. This is a hard shmup that is not really great. It's not even close to great. It's just bad. And it's bad not because it's hard. It's bad because it's bad.
All right. So there is only also one game in the best game category.
Oh, but it's so good.
Metroid Prime Remastered.
So we'll be getting to talking about the reveal of this game in just a short bit here. But Metroid Prime is often celebrated as one of the greatest games of all time. And it's definitely among my favorites. I'm not sure how high it would rank at any given time. I'd have to think about it, but it's definitely pretty high up there.
So you got me to play this game before we started this podcast. And knowing that this game originally came out on the GameCube, which there are people now who have never even seen or touched a GameCube.
Making me feel old.
And I'm thinking of like parents getting this game for their kids, or maybe just a teenager or whatever getting this game for the first time. They might think this game is really easy, or it's a little bit underrated maybe, considering what is already out at the time.
I'm not sure I'd say it's super easy. You just played the intro area.
True. However, graphically speaking, it looks like a modern game.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really impressed me about this. They call it a remaster, but it almost feels like a remake because they didn't just slap on a higher resolution and call it a day. Although it does have a really nice resolution. It's got a silky smooth 60 frames per second frame rate. They went above and beyond in redesigning some of the visuals. Like, characters and the environments have new 3D models for them, where there's a lot more detail going on. They completely redesigned a lot of the textures, so there's more detail to the textures. Where it's like, even stuff like, you know, Samus will be walking along and you'll get a spray of some, like, water on your helmet, and you'll be able to see the fine mist, like, clouding up your helmet in higher definition. You can make out the little droplets on it. It's really well done. And on top of this, they've reworked the controls, where the default control scheme is now a 2-stick control scheme like you have on modern first-person shooters. But if you really are partial to the classic control style, you have that as an option. If you prefer the version of the controls that they made for the Wii using motion control, you can do that. There's a way to do a hybrid control where you can do like a half and half between the GameCube style and the Wii style. Or you can go in and add motion controls to any of these control layouts. You can, swap different elements of the control layout. There are so many control options that if you can't find one that works for you, I feel like you're just being overly picky here. And this is so unusual for a Nintendo re-release. When we had Super Mario 3D All-Stars, they literally just slapped those games in a collection, tossed them out there, and were done with it, without really much in the way of extras. Here, there are tons of extras, there are all sorts of options, and for them to visually redesign the game to look like a modern game, like I said, they went above and beyond here. And this is on top of the fact that we are talking about a game that many, including myself, would rate as one of the best games of all time. This is a game that is still extremely unique because it is a Metroidvania that you navigate in 3D, in first-person perspective. And I can only think of a small handful of games that have succeeded with that formula. Batman Arkham Asylum is one. The other one that comes to mind is a game called Journey to the Savage Planet, which actually is designed very much like Metroid Prime. So if you like one of those two games, definitely play the other. However, I think that Metroid Prime is still the pinnacle of this very limited type of game. Like, there aren't many games like this. I'd say I like it even better than the two sequels that came out.
I'd have to agree, actually.
Oh, better than the other games that are kind of like this?
Yeah.
So this is your first time playing Metroid Prime, yeah? And again, granted, you only played a very short amount of time in the game. What did you think of your short playthrough?
I have to remember, again, that this game came out during the GameCube when I was in my preteen years. And for what it is, I'm very impressed. And I like the bits of lore that are inserted in there.
Using the scanning ability?
Yes. Yeah. I don't feel like we have any other games that are quite like that either.
I mean, I named a few that are maybe a little like that, but yeah, it's hard to beat Metroid Prime. It is so amazing. All the more reason that, man, I hope we hear about Metroid Prime 4 soon, because that has been in works for a long time.
Oh, maybe we will. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right. So the Nintendo Direct announced something pretty cool. And it's something that you and I grew up with, which is you and I grew up playing the Game Boy.
Yes.
And then the Game Boy Advance.
And the Game Boy Color's in there too, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Please continue.
So Nintendo announced that they're basically releasing these old games on the Nintendo Switch Online.
To be more specific, if you are subscribed to Nintendo Switch Online, you get access to Game Boy and Game Boy Color games via the Game Boy app that just released on Nintendo Switch Online. This is going to be no additional cost if you are already subscribed to Nintendo Switch Online. If you are not subscribed to it, it's $20 a year. I would say it's pretty worth it, because in addition to that, you also get Nintendo and Super Nintendo games. If you have the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, which costs $50 a year, you not only get the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, you also get Game Boy Advance games. In addition to that, tier also includes Nintendo 64 games and Sega Genesis games. So just with this announcement, if you are subscribed to that tier, there are, I think there's like 15 new games you can play without paying any additional money now, if you're subscribed to the expansion pack.
So for the Game Boy releases for February 2023, we have Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare, Game & Watch Gallery 3, Gargoyle's Quest, Kirby's Dream Land, Metroid 2 The Return of Samus, Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins, Tetris, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX, and Wario Land 3.
Most of these are really excellent games. I think Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare is visually impressive given when it came out, but not so great gameplay-wise. I also think, while I generally like the Wario Land series, I honestly believe that Wario Land 3 is my least favorite game in that entire series. I don't like the way that it's paced, but I know that there are some people that really enjoy it. However, all the rest of the games in this list are at least good, if not truly excellent. Game & Watch Gallery 3, I know a lot of people rolled their eyes when they saw this, but it's actually a really good collection of classic pre-Game Boy games, games that came out before the Game Boy even existed. Gargoyle's Quest is a kind of a hidden gem in the Game Boy lineup. It's kind of an action platformer with some RPG elements, and Really, really great game design there. Kirby's Dream Land is the very first Kirby game, and it's super, super short, but it's very fun while it lasts. Metroid 2 Return of Samus, still not quite at the heights of Super Metroid, the game that would come after it, but it is a huge improvement over the first Metroid game, and it is, I'd say, getting close to that level of quality. Really, the only major complaint I have about that one is that, unlike what we've come to expect from games in the Metroidvania genre, Metroid 2 doesn't have any kind of map. Super Mario Land 2 is a really good Mario platformer. It's just kind of smaller, more bite-sized compared to the console counterparts, but very much well worth playing. Tetris, I mean, if you haven't played Tetris at this point, I'd like to know the rock that you're under. The Game Boy version of Tetris, it's so old that it's lacking a lot of features we've come to get used to from modern versions of the game. Like, there's no way to save a piece. There's no way to do a fast drop where you automatically drop to the bottom. You know, stuff like that. But it's still a classic. It still has what people generally think of when they think of the Tetris music. They're thinking of this version of Tetris. I mean, as much as it's lacking, you know, modern niceties, it's still such a classic that it's worth playing. And then, finally, we have what is probably going to be the absolute highlight of the original Game Boy games, and that is The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX. And this is actually a Game Boy Color re-release of a game that was originally released on the black and white Game Boy. It approaches kind of the same style of Zelda game as Link to the Past, but it has some really creative ways of doing it. Now you can swap out either of your two weapons on either of your action button, including your sword. You don't have to be running around with your sword. You can put a bomb on one button and an arrow on the other button, and then you press them both at the same time and you get bomb arrows. Really, really creative way of handling the limitations of the Game Boy and the fact that it only had the two buttons. All of these games, the Game Boy games, I should say, all the original Game Boy games, you can choose to play with the original grayscale color palette of the original Game Boy. You can play them in the grayscale of the Game Boy Pocket, or you can play them with a default color scheme selected for them by the Game Boy Color. So there are a bunch of different display modes, and of this group, I'd say really the only game that isn't even worth playing here is Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare. And even that, I would say, is still kind of a, that's interesting kind of thing, where you might start it up to see what it looks like and kind of marvel at what they were able to accomplish with the Game Boy Color. Just, don't stick around and play it for very long. It's probably not going to be the best time there.
Okay. And then the releases for the Game Boy Advanced in February is Kuru Kuru Kuruin, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, Mario Kart Super Circuit, Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Bros. 3, The Legend of Zelda The Minish Cap, and WarioWare Inc. Mega Microgames.
The short version is, each and every one of these games is well worth playing. I would say probably the low point out of all of these is Kuru Kuru Kururin, which, good job pronouncing that, Jen.
Yay!
It's almost like a tongue twister, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kuru Kuru Kururin is a game where you are moving a rotating stick around a maze, basically, trying to avoid touching the sides of the maze. And even though I think that it's probably the least interesting of all of these games, it's still really good. It's still very well worth playing. However, it's amongst some of the giants of the Game Boy Advance. I mean, just going in order here, probably my favorite of the bunch is Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. This was a successor to Super Mario RPG, much in the same way that the original Paper Mario was a successor, but this was kind of taking a different path and made very good use of the fact that you have one button dedicated to Mario, one button dedicated to Luigi, and use different combinations of them to have them combine and do different wacky, like, team-up attacks and stuff. Really, really super creative. Fun story where you're basically teaming up with Bowser to try and save the princess, because I think this is the one she had her voice taken from her. And it turns into all kinds of little explodey icons now when she tries to speak. Like, great sense of humor. Wonderful game. Mario Kart Super Circuit is basically the Game Boy Advance version of the original Super Mario Kart, except it has a ton of new levels, and then you can unlock all of the levels from the original game. Really, the only thing that I think is kind of not so great about this version of Mario Kart is because of the screen resolution of the Game Boy Advance, it is just really pixelated, and it's kind of a bit of an eyesore. But if you can deal with that, or if you just sit far enough back from the screen, or if you're playing it in handheld mode, yeah, it is an excellent Mario Kart game. Then, Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Bros. 3, that's just the entire title. It's not 2 games, that's 1 game. It includes the original, well, a version of the original Mario Brothers, which incidentally, so did Mario and Luigi, which is already really great. But then it includes also a version of Super Mario Bros. 3 that's kind of based on the version that we saw in Super Mario All-Stars. Well, we already have Super Mario All-Stars on the Super Nintendo app, so why is that at all important here? Well, Super Mario Advance 4 also includes nearly 40 new levels that were originally levels that you scanned into the game using an accessory called the e-card reader. Basically, this is a way to play a whole slew of new levels. Well, I say new, but, new to the game. It's been out for decades now. Moving on, Legend of Zelda The Minish Cap is just a really good Zelda game where the main mechanic is that your character, Link, can shrink down and use that to solve puzzles or even enter teeny tiny dungeons. Finally, WarioWare Inc. Mega Micro Games is the first game in the WarioWare series, which has all of these little 5-second games where within the span of 5 seconds, you have to figure out what to do and then do it, and then it zooms on to the next game. Really creative game design, super fun game, and one of the best games in the series still to this day. It's really, really great. So much fun gameplay there. If you have never played any of these games, you are looking at dozens and dozens of hours of truly great gameplay just playing through all of these. And then we're going to be getting more in the future. They've already announced a half a dozen Game Boy Advance games, and I think 4 of the original Game Boy Color games. So definitely looking forward to that. Got some good stuff in our future.
All right. So January came with the Nintendo 64 release of the game GoldenEye 007.
So this one, unfortunately, we recorded our podcast before I was able to talk about this because we didn't even know it was a thing yet. So I'm taking the opportunity to talk about it now. And this is a game that, if I'm perfectly honest, I never thought we would actually get. There were just so many licensing issues regarding it, it seemed like a pipe dream. But somehow, between Nintendo and Microsoft and MGM, they worked out the licensing rights or whatever, and now we actually have GoldenEye 007 on Nintendo Switch. And it is a game that, if you've heard anyone who's played it talk about it, you've probably heard them hyping it up to no end. And going back to play it now, I think it both does and doesn't earn that reputation. On the one hand, it was way ahead of its time when it came to things like level design, when it came to things like enemy AI. There was so much in the way of creative design decisions that went into this game and made it just a truly great first-person shooter. But 2 things were not so great about it. Number one, the performance on the original Nintendo 64 would not be up to snuff by today's standards.
That's fair.
Thankfully, they've cleaned it up some in the release on Nintendo Switch. It now runs at a much more tolerable frame rate, thankfully. However, the other problem persists, and that is, this is a first-person shooter that was originally made for a game platform that only had one analog stick. So trying to control it is kind of a nightmare, and they haven't really done anything to fix that. The game's menus have a bunch of different control options, and using that and combining that with reassigning buttons on a system level on Nintendo Switch, you can kind of makeshift a control scheme that can work for this game, but you have to jump through so many hoops to get to that. It's ridiculous. When I was playing this game to review it, I was literally playing it using 2 left Joy-Cons because one of the original control schemes has you using 2 controllers, and that's the only way. Oh, it's ridiculous. So for this game, if you want to jump through those hoops to try and refinagle all the controls to work for this game, you can make it work. But for most people, that is just a lot of work to go through just to make the game baseline playable. And I just don't feel like most people are going to feel like that's worth the effort.
That's fair. All right. So now let's talk about the Nintendo Direct.
Yes, let's.
So this one was full of a lot of DLCs and remasters.
A lot of remastered stuff, you're right, and a lot of like expansion pass content. However, even though that was the case, I feel like a lot of this was really good. And I think the 2 things that really blew everyone away, we've kind of already spoiled. Because I've already told you, Metroid Prime Remastered gotta be my game of the month this month. And it was shadow dropped in this Direct. They didn't even give you a lead up to it. They're like, oh, hey, this game that you've all wanted that's really, really good, and this is a great version of it. Yeah, it's out today. You can get it right now. So, of course, I did, and yeah. But then that came after we learned about the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games. And it was like one thing after another, and the internet lost their freaking minds over this. For good reason. These are some really great games that now, just like immediately after the Direct, people could start playing. All the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games, those dropped the same day too. And it was like, immediately after the Direct, you had people going, I have so much new stuff to play, I don't even know what to start with. But even in addition to that, we got a lot of good stuff in this Direct. We got a lot of new information about games we already knew about, and we got an announcement of a lot of other games, including some good remasters of old stuff.
Okay, so Pikmin 4 was the first one announced.
This one, we already knew that they were working on Pikmin 4, but we had not seen any gameplay for it, and we didn't have a release date for it. Well, now we know it is coming out July 21st, and we got some gameplay footage, and they've got some really cool new mechanics to the game. There's this new little dog character that you can boss around and tell to break things, or you can ride on him to get across rivers. He's really cute. Adorable. You can climb up some surfaces. There are new characters in the game. I try not to talk too much about other YouTubers, but of course, watching anything Pikmin related, it's hard not to think about Arlo going nuts over this game. So that was definitely amusing.
And the other one that I'm very curious about is Samba de Amigo Party Central, which is basically your Joy-Cons become maracas.
So this is a sequel to a Dreamcast game.
Oh.
Where you actually had a Dreamcast accessory that was literally maraca controllers.
I do not remember this, and I owned a Dreamcast.
Really? I didn't know you owned a Dreamcast. Yeah, this was kind of a niche game. I mean, you have to imagine any game that has maraca controllers is going to be niche. However, they're not going to require you to buy maracas for your Nintendo Switch. You can just use the Joy-Cons for it. I'm a little iffy on this because I feel like any music rhythm game that requires motion control, like you need precision in that, and I'm not sure if the Joy-Cons are up to that, but I guess we'll see when it comes out, and that is going to be coming out summer 2023. And you skipped over, we'll just really quickly mention, they did show off Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Expansion Pass DLC Volume 3, which is coming out
very soon.
Well, by the time this recording is released, it will have already been out for a half a month.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind then. The next one that they talked about is Fashion Dreamer, coming out in 2023. I have mixed thoughts about this.
The funny thing about this game is being developed by a developer called Sin Sophia. Most of you probably have never heard of that developer, but some of you that might ring a bell, because Sin Sophia is the developer who developed these style-savvy games for the Nintendo DS and Nintendo 3DS. This game, Fashion Dreamer, is not being published by Nintendo, which is probably why they're not using the Style Savvy name. But for all intents and purposes, this looks like Style Savvy 5, where you are trying to make recommendations to people of what kind of styles that you think that they would like. You're trying to build up your own fashion shop. At least that's what the Style Savvy games were. I'm not sure if this is a completely different thing or if it's just kind of the same thing but with a different name. I guess we'll find out, but it definitely looks like it at the very least has some new elements if it is a game that's kind of in that same series. The whole, meeting people and liking their styles or, that kind of thing, that's interesting.
Yeah. I'm not, that's where I have mixed thoughts about it, because it's like, it's influencers, and it is influencers. I hate that culture a little bit. Anyway, we have Dead Cells Return to Castlevania coming out March 6, 2023.
This is one we already knew about, but it's great to see more footage of it. It looks fantastic. Anyone who loves Castlevania is sure to be excited about this.
On the 11th of April, we have Tron Identity.
So Tron Identity is being designed by Bithell Games, and this is the developer of the Subsurface Circular and Quarantine Circular games, where it was kind of this graphic adventure style game where you're making choices in the story, and this game looks to take up the same kind of gameplay style as Subsurface Circular and Quarantine Circular, which were both very good games. I don't know how much appeal this has to most people. Like, if you are a fan of the Tron franchise, your interest in that franchise probably isn't in the story. It probably isn't in, oh, I'm making choices in a story narrative. I'm curious to see what they do with it, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of people are not super interested in this game because it mixes two things that don't seem like they appeal to the same audiences.
Okay, and then next up is Ghost Trick Phantom Detective coming out summer 2023.
Ghost Trick is one of the games that we're talking about. There are a bunch of remakes and re-releases in this direct. This is one of them. This game, I believe, came out on Nintendo 3DS. Oddly, it's not one that I've reviewed in my trying to go through all of the 3DS games before March 2023 and, before they closed the eShop. So I have not played this one, but it looks like one where you're playing a ghost who is trying to possess items in the environment to help out your friend who's in various kinds of peril throughout the game. It looks interesting. I haven't played the original, so I can't say I have too much anticipation for this, but it could be good.
Next up is Deca Police.
It's like Deca Police or Deca. Yeah, I don't know the exact pronunciation.
Yeah, but it's coming out this year.
So Deca Police is one of 3 games that we saw in this direct that were developed by Level 5. And if you are at all a fan of Level 5, this should come as a huge moment of celebration for you, because Level 5 has developed some very good games in the past, but they have notoriously fallen on hard times lately. Apparently they ran into some financial troubles, and there was some very real concern that they might have to be closed, which would be a horrible tragedy because they've made some amazing games. And Deca Police is an entirely new franchise. There's not anything quite like this out there. From what I can tell, it reminds me a lot of the Digimon
Cyber Sleuth?
Yeah, Digimon Cyber Sleuth games, minus the monster collecting stuff. But if it's even remotely like that, that can only be a good thing, because that was an incredible pair of games. This one has you as these kind of like kid detectives who are solving mysteries both in the real world and in kind of a virtual space, like a virtual world. And I think it's a cool concept. It looks like maybe it has some RPG elements. I'm down for this. I'm definitely looking forward to trying this out.
Bayonetta Origins, Sarisa and the Lost Demon.
This is a game we already knew about. We already knew it was coming, and we already knew it was coming out soon. But it was good to see more footage of it. It looks interesting. It does not look even remotely like it plays like Bayonetta.
No, not quite.
Like, even the visual style is completely different than what we
It's
saw in the
cute,
Bayonetta
though.
games. Oh, yes, I do like the way it looks. I think it looks good. But I think this is, again, like the Tron game we were just talking about. I'm kind of concerned because I feel like it's trying to appeal to two different audiences at once and not really hitting either of them the way that it wants to. Like, the people who love Bayonetta are looking at this going, well, that doesn't look like I'm using the fighting stuff like in Bayonetta, and it looks kind of cutesy. And people who might be interested in the type of game this is and the visual style might hear the name Bayonetta and go, well, I haven't played any of those games, so maybe I shouldn't play this one because I won't know what's going on.
But it is a prequel.
It is a prequel, so you shouldn't need to know any of the other Bayonetta games, but I kind of feel like they're doing themselves a disservice, splitting the appeal between two audiences, each one looking at the other side and going, I'm not really interested in that.
At least it kind of follows the concept of her controlling a demon.
Yeah.
At the very least.
I'm definitely interested. I am hopeful that this will be a good game. I'm just concerned that I feel like this one might not sell as well as they're hoping.
Splatoon 3 is getting a DLC in spring 2023.
Yeah, this DLC, like, it's getting a couple of installments, and one, it just looks like it's adding a new lobby that does all the same stuff that the other lobby did, which is weird, but okay. The second DLC is the one that looks super interesting, though. This one looks like it might be some sort of new single-player campaign where you're going through a colorless world trying to add color to it. Or so I don't know. We can only speculate because we only got a brief glimpse of it. But it looks potentially interesting.
What's out now is Fire Emblem Engage Expansion Pass. And then in June of this year, we have a game called Harmony, The Fall of Reverie, which I am very curious about.
It looks interesting. This looks like kind of a visual novel style game, and I like the art style. I don't really know what's going on in terms of the story, so it's hard for me to really weigh in on this, but it looks like it could be interesting.
July 28th of this year, we have Disney Illusion Island.
The way this game looks, number one, the art style that they're using I know might be a turnoff for some people who are more used to the traditional way that Mickey Mouse and Donald and Goofy have all been drawn.
Yep.
But that aside, in terms of the way the actual gameplay looks, this reminds me a lot of Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends, which were some really good multiplayer 2D platformers with really fluid animation. This looks to be much in line with those. So I'm optimistic. I hope that this lives up to that potential because the Rayman games were excellent. Granted, this is a completely different developer, so who knows, but it'll be interesting to see if it's kind of along those lines.
Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp comes April 21st of this year.
We finally have a release date. We've waited literally a year since this game was originally supposed to come out. And then they had to delay it because right around the time it was supposed to come out, Russia decided to go and invade Ukraine.
Yep.
And kind of made it hard to think that it would be a good time to release a game where they kind of have a lighthearted war going on, and one of the countries involved in that war is clearly an analog to Russia. I think that most people at this point have kind of taken a step back and been like, okay, Nintendo, we know that you're not responsible for what's going on over there. You're trying to be sensitive toward it, but these are two great games that have been remade, and it's about time we get them. And I am very much looking forward to this. I loved the original Advance Wars games. And while I know some people were not particularly pleased with the new art style that they're using, honestly, I think it looks fantastic. I love the way that they have the characters animated. I can't wait for this one.
The one that I'm really excited about comes out on the 24th of February, which is Octopath Traveler 2.
So this is another one we already knew about, and every time I see this game, oh, it looks so good. Just visually stunning. Like, even compared to the original, which looked amazing, this game, oh, wow. I think that the new thing that we learned about this time around is that there is now a demo out for the game. Of course, by the time this podcast releases, this game will already be out. So we're talking about the past now in future tense, but we are looking forward to this in the past, and in the future, when you hear this, hopefully you will be enjoying it because it looks really, really good.
June 2nd, we have We Love Katamari Reroll plus Royal Reverie.
This is a remake of the second game in the Katamari series. This game originally came out on PlayStation 2, and the first and second games were the only ones in the series that were designed by the original creator of the Katamari Damacy series. So, yeah, super looking forward to this one too. I played the original. I loved the original. I love Katamari. I was a little worried when I saw that there were places in the trailer for this game where there were frame rate issues.
I noticed that too, actually.
The original game had frame rate issues too. So at the very least, this will probably be preferable to the original. But if it comes out with those frame rate issues, that'll be disappointing. It'll still be a great game, even if it has issues like that, I'm sure. But in any case, regardless of that, yeah, still super looking forward to this.
Coming out 29th of August is Sea of Stars.
We knew about this game coming up in 2023, but we did not have a release date for it. And this is another one where it is visually gorgeous. I am looking forward to the soundtrack created by Yasunori Mitsuda, who made the soundtrack for the Chrono Trigger series, made the soundtrack for Xenogears, made the soundtrack for Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Yeah, just looks to be a really great kind of old school style JRPG. Can't wait.
Omega Strike comes out 27th of April.
Omega Strike, which is such a generic sounding name.
Yeah.
Omega Strike is a free-to-play game that has you basically playing like hockey. 3 versus 3 air hockey.
Yes, okay. There we go.
And that is not out yet, but obviously I will be reviewing it when it comes out because it's free to play. Why wouldn't I review it?
Etrian Odyssey Origins Collection comes out June 1st.
I am a huge fan of the Etrian Odyssey series. I love these games. And this collection includes remastered versions of the first 3 games in the series. Most of my experience with the Etrian Odyssey series comes with the 3DS games. Earlier this year, I reviewed every single 3DS entry in the series. Loved every one of them. Well, except Etrian Mystery Dungeon, but that's a whole other thing. These games are JRPGs with a heavy first-person dungeon crawler element to them. But one of the things that really sets them apart from other dungeon crawlers is that you are drawing the map as you go along. And I'm kind of curious to see how they handled that feature on the Nintendo Switch, because in the original release, you had the dual screen on the DS or 3DS, and you could just use the touch screen to draw the map. Here, they've kind of split the screen in two, where you have the map on the right side of the screen, and I'm hoping that they have touchscreen support, but also kind of a little concerned about that, because if you are drawing using the touchscreen, that requires some precision, which you had with the stylus, have a bit less of that with your fingers. So yeah. I don't know how that'll work. I'm curious to see how they do it, but definitely looking forward to it either way. I was so pleased when I saw this. I stood up in my seat when I saw this announced.
Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe will be out by the time this podcast airs.
Yeah, and this trailer that we saw in the Direct was our first look at some post-game content that they're adding to this version of the game. Centering on the character of Magalore, and it's got this RPG element to it. This actually really renewed my interest in this game. Like, I was already going to be buying it and reviewing it for the subreddit, but now apparently I need to beat it so I can get to the post-game content, which normally when I review a game, I play it long enough to get a good feel for it. And clearly I'm not going to be able to do that for this game because there is some very important new content that is only at the end of the game. So wish me luck in that. I guess we'll find out by the time this podcast comes out whether or not I was able to get the review out in a decent amount of time. But hopefully, in any case, I'm very much looking forward to playing this game and the new content that they revealed in this trailer.
Baten Kaitos 1 and 2 HD Remaster comes out summer 2023.
So we just skipped over right now in the direct. Everyone is losing their minds because they just announced the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games, and then they followed that by announcing Metroid Prime Remaster. So everyone is just shouting and cheering at this point because those are things that everyone has wanted for years now. I feel like Baten Kaitos 1 and 2 HD Remaster might have gotten overlooked because, those were some big announcements it's just following. However, these are two really well-regarded RPGs that came out on the GameCube. They're well-regarded, but they're also kind of overlooked because these are card-based RPGs. And at the time that this came out, that was still kind of a novel thing, and I'm not sure that many people were really feeling down for a card RPG. I know that for me at the time, that wasn't something that really caught my interest back then. Like, oh, you have to fight using cards? That's kind of, I don't know about that. Now, though, I've gotten more used to the concept, and I mean, looking at games like Slay the Spire, I am so down for a card RPG right now. And I am loving that they are including both of the games from the GameCube on one release here. Very much looking forward to this. Oh, and graphically it looks gorgeous too. So, yeah.
Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time comes out sometime this year.
This game is the second of the 3 level 5 games that I mentioned earlier. Like I said, level 5 went hard on this Nintendo Direct. They have some really interesting stuff coming up. And with this one, this is a sequel to a Nintendo 3DS game that was a really unique kind of a combination of, you have elements that you expect from games like Animal Crossing, where you're kind of building up your town or you're doing stuff for your townsfolk. But it also has some RPG or action RPG elements where you're fighting monsters and stuff. And the key, like the central gameplay mechanic of this game is your character can take on different jobs, and each of the different jobs has different quests associated with it. Where if you want to do some fighting, you could take on a job as a warrior adventurer type and go off and fight monsters. Or alternately, you can take up a job as a cook, and you're just trying to gather up ingredients to make really good dishes for your town. And a lot of really good variety in this game. Just, it feels like there's this big world where you can explore and do different things in. And if the sequel is anything like the first game, this will be a really great game.
Professor Layton and the New World of Steam.
This game is the third of the level 5 games announced at this show. And I think this game took everyone by surprise because previous to this, the folks at level 5 had said that Professor Layton had reached the end of his story. The end of the saga was the game's on the Nintendo 3DS. And a lot of people really loved the Professor Layton games. They're kind of like a combination of a graphic adventure visual novel style game and a puzzle game where you're going around talking to people trying to solve mysteries, and every now and then you get tossed into a puzzle that you need to solve in order to get an answer to a question that you're asking someone. And really beautiful design for these games, really fun story, great characters, good gameplay. But it also seemed like maybe we reached the end of this series. Or maybe they were going to go into Professor Layton's, I think it's his daughter, Catriel, who was in the last game in the series, or the last previous to this. So to be watching this trailer and then to see Professor Layton himself turn around and tip his hat, oh, that was just a wonderful moment. And any fans of this series had to be losing it at seeing this. Just so great.
Next up is the DLC for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which looks cool, and also introducing a new character.
So they introduced the character of Birdo, who has not been in a Mario Kart game, I think, since Mario Kart Double Dash, I want to say. Which, that's kind of cool, but really I think the big thing here was they announced an entirely new track for the game. This is not ported from any other console. They made a new track based on the original Yoshi's Island game, and this track looks amazing. They have all kinds of little elements pulled directly from the game, where you have, the big blarg in the background. You have a platform that's building itself as you're going across it. Just really creative stuff going on here. And for all of the people who have been complaining that there hasn't been a new Mario Kart game in so long, I mean, we're getting new Mario Kart content right now on the game you already own. Stop complaining. This is great. And that's just one of the courses we're going to be getting in this pass.
Mm-hmm. WBSC eBaseball Power Pros is out now.
This one is a long-running series in Japan that Konami has been making for ages, but it's just never caught on in America. And apparently they pulled a Hail Mary with this one. This game, it uses really cutesy, very simple-looking characters, just like a few polygons to make these. It's almost like a couple of spheres on top of a cube. They're just so simple-looking, which is part of the reason why I'm sure it doesn't appeal that much to US gamers. But like I said, they pulled a Hail Mary with this one, and that Hail Mary is, it has released for $1. And if you'll remember, this is one of the games that's up for the vote that I mentioned earlier on.
There was also a sizzle reel with a bunch of games that we already knew ahead of time. Basically, Nintendo's just reminding us that, hey, these games are also coming out as well. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that everybody wanted to see, you and I included, was The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which is coming out May 12th of this year.
Honestly, I was kind of disappointed in this trailer. I felt like it
wasn't enough.
Yeah, it was way too short.
Yeah.
It didn't show us enough. I still have no idea what the big thing that separates this game from Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is. I mean, I see all the islands floating in the sky. I see Link dropping down, but I'm not sure how that works in terms of gameplay. Will you be looking for shrines on the floating islands? Are you looking for a way to get up there? How does all of that work? How is this different from Breath of the Wild? He also has
a vehicle that I saw.
Yeah, either one or a couple. It's kind of hard to tell if it's the same vehicle that was just reconfigured or if it's multiple. But yeah, Link's controlling. Honestly, it looks like one of the vehicles that you build in Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, where it's like this flat square and then you're sticking stuff on top of it. And if that's kind of how they're going with this, if they're going like Link is building a vehicle and recrafting it in order to get to different places, that's kind of cool. It's kind of interesting. I'm not sure if that's what they're going for. They're not giving us enough. Obviously, we all want it. Obviously, we all want to get our hands on it because it is the sequel to what many believe is the best game on Nintendo Switch. But I want it without really even knowing what it is yet. I'm still kind of feeling in the dark.
I am apprehensive about it because generally sequels don't always do very well. And I felt like this trailer just showed off some things, some parts that really didn't connect to a whole for me.
Oh, like what?
What's the story?
That's another thing. There's this guy talking in the trailer like, oh, Hyrule, destroy them, kill every last person. And it's like, okay, who's that guy? Who's talking? Who are we listening to? Why does he want to destroy Hyrule? Are Link and Zelda hearing him saying this, or is he just talking to his troops and we'll get a cutscene with him talking to it? What is the deal? What is going on here?
All right. Well,
yeah, I don't know.
That wraps things up for this month's eShopper Reviews podcast. Again, we want to thank all of our patrons on Patreon for contributing. Patreon donors are the first ones to gain access to these podcasts, and if you are interested in becoming a donor, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. And once again, if you're curious to read any of the reviews or content mentioned in this podcast, you can find it at the eShopper Reviews subreddit at reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. Once again, this has been Jenn
and Jake McNeil.
We'll see you next month. In the meantime, we both hope you found this content helpful and enjoyed some good games.
Like Metroid 2, Seamus returns.
Catch you all next time.
Later.